Tonight, ISIS confirms a case of mistaken identity, and Medyascope's very own Doğu Eroğlu will be joining us to break it down. More on Turkey's potential ground invasion into Syria, and we'll have journalist Heidye Levent to make sense of it all. The opposition coalition is at it again, and Erdoğan takes aim at a grocery chain. I am Murat, Türsan, and this is This Week in Turkey. Our first story tonight. Do you know what the leader of ISIS looks like? No? Well, you have something in common with the government. Since the leaders of ISIS have a tendency to be picked off one by one, the militant Islamist group has been keeping the leaders' identities a secret. However, back in May 2021, Turkey detained an Iraqi man known as Bashar Katab Ghazab al-Sumaidi, or Abu Zaid. Nothing was heard of the detained man for some time after that, except he resurfaced again in September when the government arrested Abu Zaid in Istanbul, believing him to be the then current leader of ISIS, aka Abu Hassan al-Hashimi al-Qurashi. Now, the problem with that was nobody really knew what al-Qurashi looked like. But Turkey at first thought they had him. They had the head of ISIS. Despite ISIS saying that he was not in fact the leader was not under arrest, he was a free man, and that man was not Qurashi. Well, this week ISIS has declared that Qurashi is in fact dead and has named a new leader, a new Qurashi. And this is relevant because as Turkey prepares to militarily intervene in Syria, it is also asking the United States to step aside. And if the US does step aside, it would stand to reason that the responsibility of fighting ISIS would fall on Turkey's shoulders. But is Turkey ready to handle that type of mission? Remains to be seen. Doğu Eroğlu will shed a little bit of light on that in just a little bit, but let's get a recap of last week first.
Last September, Bashar Katab Ghazal al-Sumaidi, codenamed Abu Zaid, was arrested in Istanbul. At the time, Zaid was thought to be the leader of ISIS, operating under the name Abu Ibrahim al-Hashimi al-Qurashi. Al-Qurashi had been named the leader of ISIS earlier in March, but his true identity was unclear. President Erdoğan claimed that Abu Zaid had been acting as the highest figure in ISIS since the death of the former caliph. Upon his arrest, his indictment dated 10th of October, based on an ISIS insider testimony and other information, stated that Abu Zaid was most likely the man known as Al-Qurashi, the group's third self-proclaimed caliph. Abu Zaid was later identified as a high-level executive, claiming that he was never involved in fighting and was selected for the role against his wishes. ISIS had never named their caliph to be Abu Zaid and denied that the ISIS leader was imprisoned. On Wednesday, ISIS media arm Al-Furqan Foundation announced that the ISIS leader Al-Qurashi had died while fighting the enemies of Allah. Fighting against Turkish-backed Free Syrian Army rebels, a statement confirmed by the U.S. Central Command. ISIS has had 3 leaders or self-proclaimed caliphs since 2013. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi died in 2019 during a U.S. Special Forces raid. Al-Baghdadi reportedly detonated a suicide vest when he became aware of the raid. The second leader of ISIS, Abu Ibrahim al-Hashimi al-Qurashi, died much in the same way when he detonated a bomb as U.S. Special Forces were advancing on his compound. The raid took place a few hundred meters away from Turkey, raising questions about the competency of Turkey in monitoring the area.
Joining me now, Medyascope's very own and prolific reporter focusing on ISIS links in Turkey, Doğu Eroğlu. Doğu, thank you for joining me.
Hello, Murat.
Now, Doğu, as Turkey is preparing to invade Syria and telling the United States to get out of the way, it would stand to reason that Turkey might have to take on the responsibility of handling ISIS on its own. Now, how well equipped is Turkey to do that exactly, and how deep does ISIS links go in Turkey?
Well, Turkey's been combating against Islamic State for a long time, beginning from 2016. That might be the official date that Turkey took on ISIS as a competitor over Syrian soil. But now almost 6 years have passed, And Turkey, despite Turkey's efforts, were less important in terms of joining the all-together combat against Islamic State when the U.S. set up the large coalition force. But later, Turkey had started to become the main organized opposition against the Islamic State in some areas. But there's the SDF, of course, and SDF has been a former foe of the Islamic State for much longer time than Turkey, because, as you know, the SDF has been on the front lines against the combat against the Islamic State since 2014, and this fact is still standing, and Turkey is going to be it appears, if the United States leaves its position in Syria and gives up its support to the SDF, Turkey might be the sole responsible organized state that is fighting against the Islamic State. So this all-together combat requires a lot of things, but intelligence comes first. As far as I know, my personal accounts tell me that the Turkey's main intelligence source has been the United States since the beginning of the ISIS versus Turkey standoff. So if the United States leaves the region, leaves the fight against the Islamic State, Turkey might come up short in terms of intelligence. That is one challenge. And also the interior efforts against Islamic State has to be I should say that if Turkey gets deprived of the U.S. intelligence, it might affect Turkey's interior fight against Islamic State connected individuals or groups as well, because as I said, Turkey didn't have a lot of background information about Islamic State-related individuals. And during the infighting against the SDF got hold on a lot of information sources, and those sources were shared with the U.S. intelligence. And even though SDF in some cases received up-to-date information, that information traveled to Turkey through U.S. So if you take U.S. out of the equation, Turkey might suffer some shortage of information about Islamic State-related individuals, and this might further affect Turkey's insecurity. Like the Turkish intelligence and Turkish police relied heavily on U.S. intelligence while they were carrying out operations, while they were trying to detain ISIS-related individuals before they carry out attacks in Turkey. So this might kind of make it more difficult for police or any sort of anti-terror forces to find out about those individuals, to prevent those attacks. So that's I might say is a risky road, but they should find a way to maintain U.S. intelligence. They should keep it coming. They should find a way to keep it coming. And despite U.S. leaving this area, it might not mean that U.S. intelligence sources get immediately dried up.
Fingers crossed. Let's hope. Doğu, thank you for joining me in the studio. Always a pleasure to have you on. Moving on to our main story tonight. Despite vocal objections from the United States and Russia, Turkey appears intent on launching a large-scale military operation into Syria. Last month, Turkey suffered a horrendous terrorist bombing in one of the most crowded avenues in Istanbul, killing 6 people. The government immediately held PKK and YPG responsible for the bombing and began launching airstrikes over Syria, hitting PKK and YPG positions. However, the United States, which maintains a contingent force of about 900 soldiers in northern Syria, is vehemently against Turkey's invasion plans. U.S. troops run joint patrols with YPG forces in northern Syria to keep ISIS at bay. Despite Pentagon saying that the joint patrols have been reduced, Turkey still blames the U.S. of supporting terrorists, as Turkey considers PKK and YPG one and the same. But that's not all. After a decade of calling for Assad's removal, President Erdoğan is saying that he is willing to meet with him. This week, Assad reportedly said that it was difficult to gauge if Erdoğan was sincere in finding a diplomatic solution to the hostilities or if this was just a political maneuver. And we will ask exactly that to Hediye Levent, who will be joining us in just a little bit. But let's get a recap of last week first.
On Monday, a Turkish official speaking to Reuters said that a Turkish incursion into Syria could be imminent, saying, "The armed forces only need a few days to be almost completely ready." The unnamed official added, "All preparations are complete. It will not take long for the operation to begin. We are just waiting for President Erdoğan's orders." According to the reporting, the ground invasion will target Manbij, Kobane, and Tel Rifat, and attempt to merge areas controlled by the Turkish forces and Turkish-backed rebels. Another Turkish official speaking to Reuters said, "All preparations have been completed. This is now a political decision." As Turkey mulls over its invasion plans, last week President Erdoğan also floated a meeting with Syrian President Assad, saying, "There are no hard feelings in politics." This week, Assad claimed that Turkey was ready to meet Syria's demands, but added that Syria expects actions, not words, and added that it was hard to know if Ankara was sincere in wanting to engage in talks or if it was simply a political maneuver. On Wednesday, the Pentagon reiterated its opposition to Turkey's ground operation, saying it could jeopardize the gains made in the fight against ISIS, and reiterated a call for restraint. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin and Turkish Defense Minister Hulusi Akar had a phone call Wednesday. Secretary Austin called for de-escalation and shared the department's strong opposition to a new Turkish military operation into Syria. Akar responded to questions after the fact and stated that the United States' approach to terrorist organizations such as PKK and YPG are unacceptable. Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu responded to the Pentagon, urging the U.S. to stand out of Turkey's way, saying, "It is clear that some allies, particularly the U.S., support terrorist organizations in Syria. We demand that they end their support."
And joining me now, subject matter expert and independent journalist, Ms. Hediye Levent. Ms. Levent, thank you for joining us. Now, I'd like to start off with this. As Turkey threatens a ground invasion of Syria, President Erdoğan is also floating a potential meeting with Assad, and President Assad appears to be rather open to it. And after almost a decade of Erdoğan calling for Assad's removal, has Ankara and Damascus finally found a common goal? And if so, what do you suppose that is?
Nowadays, Ankara is trying to convince United States and Russia for a green light for a military operation in Syria. But Turkey is trying to achieve two main goals by this military operation in Syria. First of all, Turkey is considering a potential independent structure, Kurdish structure in Syria as a potential great danger for Turkey. And Ankara's second goal by this military operation is trying to convince Damascus for meeting on a common danger for both capitals. What is it? It is the Kurdish issue. And for Turkey, at the same time, we hear that Turkey is trying to find or open some diplomatic channels with Damascus, but at the same time, Turkey is looking for green light for having a military operation that looks like controversial. But for Ankara's politics, it is not something controversial because Ankara has a vital relation with Damascus. And it has been almost a decade. So it is not easy to normalize relations with Damascus and Ankara in a few days or with a few statements. So Ankara doesn't want to give anything to Damascus, but trying to get everything from Damascus. I mean, Turkey also supporting some military groups, armed groups in the north of Syria, and Turkey is trying to convince Damascus to use those armed groups as a political issue or political fight in the negotiations with Syria. And now Damascus is saying, yes, okay, we can have good relations or we can normalize our relations with Turkey, but under two conditions. Damascus asks Ankara to finish or stop the existence of Turkish military in the north of Syria and to stop Turkish support to the armed groups which are considered as terrorist groups by Damascus. And Ankara is now far from those conditions, actually doesn't want to do what Damascus wants. But on the other hand, Turkey pushes Damascus to meet on a common enemy. I mean, Turkey wants Damascus to consider the Kurdish structures in Syria as a common enemy, so they can meet by, or they can normalize their relations by fighting against a common enemy. But also at this point, Damascus doesn't consider the Kurdish structures in Syria as enemies or separatists or a great danger to its existence.
I see. And let's move on to this. According to reporting from Reuters, an unnamed Turkish official said this week all preparations for the ground invasion have been completed. This is now a political decision. Now, as the 2023 election is right around the corner, one can't help but wonder if the official meant if this was a regional political decision or a domestic political decision. What is your take on the matter? Is this potential operation for Syria, is this potential operation into Syria Erdoğan's Syria strategy or domestic strategy? What do you think?
Both of them, I think, because as I said, the Kurdish structures or a possible Kurdish free state structure in Syria is a great danger for Turkish state, and it is, how can I say, it is a great important issue for the state of Turkey also, not just for the governments or not just for Ankara and in this case for AKP. But I think at first maybe I need to tell you something about the ground in Syria. There is a really huge military activity on the ground. On one side, the United States supported Kurdish forces are sending troops or military equipment to some places, and on the other side, Russia supported Syrian army doing the same, and Turkey also training the groups which are supported by Turkey. And all the groups are trying to finish their and they are trying to be ready for a ground operation or invasion in Syria. But I think it is very related to the diplomatic relations or political relations between Moscow and Washington. So Turkey cannot have a military operation without the permission, clear permission from Russia, because Russia is also controlling the airspace of Syria, and Turkey cannot be very successful by having a military operation without airspace. So this is very important for Turkey to convince both capitals for having a military operation in Syria. And on the other side, yes, regarding the elections in Turkey, yes, it is very useful card for the government, for especially for getting the votes of the nationalists. But there are a few months, I mean, for elections. It will happen on May or, I don't know, maybe June. It's not clear yet. But I think it is too early. If Ankara considers that military operation as an investment for the elections, it is too early for having that ground operations because there are a few months for the elections.
I see. So if this were in fact politically motivated, you think that the operation would be closer to the 2023 elections?
Yes, it may be.
Mm-hmm. I see.
And I think our government or Turkish government will keep saying we will have a military operation anytime, but they will hesitate for having that military operation in practice.
I see. Okay, and Ms. Levent, let's finally end on this. Russia and the United States are not particularly interested in Turkey launching a ground operation in Syria, as you mentioned and I mentioned. However, Russia is rather preoccupied at the moment, so to the layman, it looks like it's really going to come down to the United States. The Pentagon has repeatedly said that they're against the operation, but when push comes to shove, do you think they will stand in the way or move aside?
It is not clear because also that depends on the negotiations between Ankara, Washington, and Moscow, and Tehran, and also Damascus, and also there are some Arab countries such as Saudi Arabia and Egypt are very interested and involved in Syria case. So it's not clear yet. I think there are really very tough negotiations between all those capitals. And all those capitals have their own agenda in Syria. They all have political or military groups or sides which are supported by those countries. And also all those factors are affecting the Turkish decisions in Syria and also Turkey's negotiations with Moscow and the United States. But we should remember that after the invasion of Ukraine, especially Russia and especially Putin needs Erdoğan. So maybe they ignore Turkey's or Ankara's some politics or maybe some very limited military operations in Syria in return of something, some advantage in Ukraine. I don't know, but on the other side, United States also tries to keep Turkey close to West countries. Because of that, United States also may close its eyes to a very limited military operations in return of Turkey's relations and Russia relations.
I see.
Turkey's relations with Russia.
So it is in fact possible for the United States to move aside for a limited scope operation.
Yes.
I see.
It's possible.
Ms. Levent, thank you so much for breaking that down and making sense of it all. It's a pleasure to have you on. Moving on to domestic politics, the Table of Six. Yes, that one. With the elections right around the corner, the opposition coalition is coming out of the gate pretty strong. The Table of Six finally introduced their new proposed constitution on Monday. A little background. Turkey is a presidential republic. There is a president and a parliament, but it wasn't always like that. As a matter of fact, it wasn't like that until not too long ago. In a referendum held in 2017, President Erdoğan was granted sweeping executive powers, and the country transitioned from a parliamentary republic to a presidential one. And the position of the prime minister was abolished altogether. Well, the opposition views that as a mistake and has proposed constitutional amendments to propose a strengthened parliamentary system. If the opposition is successful in the upcoming elections, Turkey's style of governance can change dramatically. But that's not all. Looks like the coalition is not only making Turkey's fledgling economy one of the key election issues, but is also offering technocratic solutions. The coalition, namely Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, has put together a panel of 70 experts to produce a roadmap to ostensibly dig Turkey out of its economic predicament. Let's go to the details.
The Table of Six held its 9th meeting on the 28th with the Democratic Party as its host. Leaders of all 6 parties gathered at the politically significant Ankara Bilkent Hotel, and made the Strengthened Parliamentary System Constitution Change Roadmap public. The constitutional changes that the 6 parties agreed on amounted to 85 amendments, including one that will regulate how the new presidents will be elected to office. The Table of 6 aims to take executive powers away from the president and give it back to the parliament with most of the new amendments. Last week, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu tweeted, 3rd of December, wait for it. After the 9th meeting of the Table of 6, it was announced that CHP and Kılıçdaroğlu would be holding the meeting, the Invitation to the Second Century, where he will announce his vision document. One CHP member described the document as how a leader brings power together and appoints the best and brightest to set the country to its factory defaults. Kılıçdaroğlu will appear on the podium with a star lineup. American writer, economist, activist, and advisor Jeremy Rifkin, and world-renowned economist and co-author of the book Why Nations Fail, Dr. Derin Acemoglu, are some of the big names expected to be a part of the presentation with Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. Although the details of the meeting are unknown, it is highly speculated that Kılıçdaroğlu will declare an economic agenda and Turkey's possible course out of its current economic conundrum.
And if you know anything about Turkey, you know that the name is synonymous with mind-bogglingly high levels of inflation. The Turkish government says that the consumer price index is at about 85% this month, whereas independent groups say that it is closer to 180%. And people definitely feel the squeeze. But President Erdoğan has more interesting theories about inflation. While he does indeed acknowledge it, he sometimes blames the media for blowing it out of proportion or retailers for sitting on excess stock and artificially driving up prices. But one company in particular always seems to get the blame more so than others, and that is BİM. BİM is one of Turkey's largest chain grocery stores, known for selling basic goods at discount prices. But what is more interesting about BİM is who owns it. The Topbaş family. The Topbaş family are major shareholders of that particular company. Topbaş as in late Kadir Topbaş, the former AKP mayor of Istanbul and a high up in the party. In 2017, after President Erdoğan became an executive president, he suddenly quit his post. No explanation, no reason. He just quit. The theories as to the connections in between those two deserve a show onto itself, but it looks like BİM's executive board member Galip Aykaç has had it up to here with getting slammed by the government and government-aligned media. Here's that story.
Last week, President Erdoğan blamed high food prices on both the media and the supermarket, saying, "We have a serious problem, and it's the media. They are always going on about supermarkets. They have nothing else to do. As I said in last week's cabinet meeting, we will tighten our inspections." In light of sky-high inflation, police go around Turkey inspecting supermarkets to ensure they do not keep excess supply in stock to artificially inflate food prices. After President Erdoğan's accusations, government-aligned media began slamming the retailer BİM. BİM has long been under government scrutiny. Back in October of last year, among other chains, BİM was fined 958 million liras. On Wednesday, BİM's executive board member Galip Aykaç struck back at the media, calling them trolls and that the government-aligned media outlets were distorting the facts by reporting on BİM's profits without adjusting for inflation. Medyascope asked shoppers if they agreed with President Erdoğan's accusations.
I absolutely don't agree.
Why not?
Since I was born, people and retailers have always trusted each other. The prices have gone up for them as well. There's nothing they can do.
So do you think it's inflation or the retail markup?
It's inflation.
It's inflation.
Some say that some markets hike up the prices more. Do you agree?
Yes, I agree with that too. Small markets usually.
Did you change your shopping habits in the last year?
Yes.
How so?
Everything has changed, even bread.
Are you having trouble affording something you would usually buy?
Of course, I bought 3 tomatoes for 10 liras.
Do you remember how much it was this time last year?
It used to be about 1.5 liras.
It went up 8 liras?
Yes.
Why do you think?
Inflation.
And with that, that's it for us in This Week in Turkey. I have Murat Türsan. A special thanks to Mehmet Tanverdi for news text and Kathleen Phelps for voiceovers, and Deniz Çakır and Janset Atalay for also helping out. And a special thanks to you for joining us as per usual, and have a good night and a good weekend.